It's time you paid for everything.
Eddie's hands shook as he stared at the encrypted message on Helena's phone. Meet me at the old pier. Sarah can't know, not yet. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. Owen's contact photo smiled back at him. His wife's lover, his daughter's fiancé, the man who would marry into their family in 3 days. Eddie set the phone down exactly where Helena had left it on the kitchen counter. 22 years of marriage. And this was how he found out. Not through tears or confessions, but through a forgotten phone and a moment of curiosity that would destroy everything. The Martha's Vineyard wind rattled the old beach house windows. Same sound that had lulled him to sleep as a child, back when this place meant safety instead of secrets, back when his family was just complicated, not rotten. He walked to the living room where Helena sat reading, her reading glasses perched on her nose, looking like the professor she'd once wanted to be before she became Mrs. Edward Halloran, keeper of appearances and curator of lies. Good book? He asked. She looked up, smiled, that practiced smile. Just some light fiction. You know how I like my happy endings. Eddie nodded and went upstairs. In their bedroom, he opened his laptop and began typing. Not an email, not a letter. A plan. Because Eddie Halloran had spent 44 years fixing everyone else's problems, and now it was time to fix his own, even if it meant burning down everything he'd built. Friday morning, 3 days before the wedding. The rehearsal dinner invitations sat on Margaret Halloran's kitchen table like a taunt. 65 years old, and she still felt like she was performing for an audience that would never applaud. Eddie, the caterer called again, she said into her phone. They need the final count. Tell them 43, Eddie's voice crackled through the speaker. Sarah added bridge at the last minute. Margaret wrote the number down with shaking hands. 43 people, to witness her granddaughter's wedding to a man who was sleeping with her daughter-in-law. She'd seen them together last month at the harbor, thinking they were being careful, thinking no one would notice. She'd noticed. She always noticed. It was her curse and her talent. Mother, are you listening? Eddie's voice pulled her back. Yes, dear, 43. I'll call them now. She hung up and stared at the invitation. Sarah Jennifer Halloran and Owen Michael Fletcher request your presence. The embossing had cost $400. The marriage would cost much more. Margaret picked up her address book, fingers finding Dr. Felix Moran's number. She'd been putting off this call for weeks, but time was running out. Some secrets could stay buried. Others had to be managed. Felix answered on the second ring. Margaret, it's been too long. I need to see you, Felix. Today, if possible. It's about the family. A pause. Then, the usual place? The usual place. She hung up and looked out the window at the cliffs where she'd walked with her husband 40 years ago, when they were young and stupid and thought love was enough. Before she learned that love was just the appetizer, power was the main course. Friday afternoon, Bridge Collins sat in her rusted Honda outside the Halloran Beach House, gathering courage she didn't have. 22 years old and still playing second fiddle to Sarah Halloran. Still grateful for scraps of attention from the golden girl who'd never noticed how much Bridge wanted her life. Her phone buzzed. Text from Sarah. Running late, let yourself in? Wine in fridge? Bridge knew where they kept the spare key. She'd been letting herself into Sarah's life for 15 years, always welcome, never quite belonging. The house felt different, empty. Bigger somehow, more imposing. Bridge had always known the Hallorans had money, but standing alone in their living room, she felt the weight of it. The antique furniture, the oil paintings, the Persian rugs that cost more than Bridge's annual salary at the insurance office. She poured herself a glass of white wine and wandered into Eddie's study. His laptop was open on the desk, screensaver cycling through family photos. Sarah at graduation, Sarah at Christmas, Sarah looking perfect in every shot. Bridge touched the trackpad and the screen came alive. Eddie's email was open to a message from someone called Paulina Voss. The subject line made Bridge's wine glass freeze halfway to her lips. Helena Halloran investigation, confidential. Bridge looked around, heart hammering. She shouldn't read this. She should close the laptop and pretend she never saw it. Instead, she clicked. Eddie, I have what you requested. Helena's business dealings aren't as clean as she pretends. The Patterson development deal? She took kickbacks. I have documentation. As discussed, this information comes at a price. Let me know when you're ready to proceed. Bridge stared at the screen. Eddie was investigating his own wife. Why and who was Paulina Voss? Bridge? What are you doing? Bridge spun around. Sarah stood in the doorway, engagement ring catching the afternoon light, looking beautiful and perfect and utterly clueless about the bomb sitting in her father's email. I was just... Your dad's laptop was open and I accidentally... Sarah laughed, the sound like silver bells. Dad's always leaving his work stuff lying around. Mom says he'd lose his head if it wasn't screwed on. She hugged Bridge, smelling like expensive perfume and happiness. I'm so glad you're here early. I have news. Bridge closed the laptop with shaking hands. News? Sarah's smile could have powered the whole island. I'm pregnant. The wine glass slipped from Bridge's fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor. Red wine spread across the antique Persian rug, and Bridge thought stupidly that this was exactly how her friendship with Sarah would end, with something beautiful and expensive ruined by her clumsy hands. Oh God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. Don't worry about the rug. Sarah was practically glowing. Did you hear what I said? I'm having a baby. Bridge knelt to pick up glass shards, mind racing. Sarah was pregnant. Helena was having an affair with Owen. Eddie was investigating Helena, and Bridge had somehow landed in the middle of a family explosion that would make her wine stain look like a minor accident. When? Bridge managed. Doctor says I'm about 6 weeks along. Owen doesn't know yet. I want to tell him tonight, after dinner with the family. Sarah knelt beside Bridge, helping with the glass. Can you believe it? Everything's falling into place perfectly. Bridge cut her finger on a shard and watched the wine soak deeper into the expensive rug. She sucked on the cut and tasted copper and regret. Perfect, she whispered. Friday evening. Family dinner. Charlie Halloran arrived drunk to his mother's dinner party, which wasn't unusual except that he was usually more careful about hiding it. 38 years old and still disappointing people was exhausting work. Charles, his mother said when he stumbled through the door, you're late. Traffic, he lied, then kissed her cheek and smelled her disapproval. Margaret Halloran had perfected the art of communicating disappointment through pheromones. Eddie was setting the table with military precision, each fork exactly 1 inch from the plate edge. His older brother had always been good at details, good at making things look right, even when everything was wrong. Need help? Charlie offered. Eddie looked at him with eyes that seemed older than they had yesterday. I've got it. Helena emerged from the kitchen carrying a casserole dish, looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine ad for Gracious Living. She'd always made Charlie feel like he was tracking mud on her white carpets. Charlie, how lovely. I was just telling Sarah about your new job. Charlie's stomach clenched. He hadn't told anyone about losing the construction job last week. Right. The job? Sarah bounced into the room with Owen trailing behind her. Charlie's niece looked like she was about to burst with some kind of secret, and Owen looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Interesting combination. Bridge followed them, quiet as always, like she was afraid someone would remember she didn't actually belong there and ask her to leave. Where's Dad? Sarah asked. Working late, Eddie said. Again. Margaret's mouth tightened. Your father's dedication to his business has always been admirable. Admirable, Helena murmured, and Charlie caught something sharp in her tone. And that's one word for it. They sat down to eat Margaret's pot roast, the same meal she'd been making for family dinners since Charlie was 10. Some traditions never died, even when they probably should. So, Margaret said, cutting her meat with surgical precision, Owen, how are the wedding preparations coming along? Owen shifted in his seat. Good, really good. Everything's under control. Is it? Eddie asked quietly. Something passed between Eddie and Owen that Charlie couldn't read, but it made the hair on his arms stand up. His brother was planning something. Charlie had seen that look before, usually right before Eddie solved someone's problem in a way that created 3 new problems. I have an announcement, Sarah said, unable to contain herself any longer. The table went quiet. Charlie noticed Bridge's hands were shaking. Owen and I are going to have a baby. The silence stretched like a taut wire. Charlie watched faces around the table, reading reactions like he'd learned to read his mother's moods. Margaret's smile was too bright. Helena's face went white. Eddie's expression didn't change at all, which was somehow the most terrifying response. Owen looked like he was going to throw up. That's wonderful, dear, Margaret finally said. absolutely wonderful. Congratulations, Helena added, her voice flat as old champagne. Bridge excused herself to the bathroom and didn't come back for 10 minutes. Charlie raised his beer bottle. To new beginnings. They all drank to that, even though Charlie was pretty sure they were toasting the end of something instead. After dinner, Charlie cornered Eddie in the kitchen while the others moved to the living room. "What's going on?" he asked. Eddie was washing dishes with the same methodical precision he'd used to set the table. "What do you mean?" "Cut the crap, Eddie. You've got that look." Eddie's hands stilled in the soapy water. "What look?" "The look you had when you figured out Dad was skimming from the business, right before you turned him into the IRS. Eddie pulled his hands out of the water and dried them slowly. "Dad was stealing from his own employees' pension fund. And you destroyed his life. I saved 12 families from poverty when they retired." Charlie studied his brother's profile. Eddie had always been the righteous one, the one who did the hard thing because it was right, no matter the consequences. It was admirable and terrifying in equal measure. "So, what's the hard thing this time?" Charlie asked. Eddie hung up the dish towel and looked at Charlie with eyes that seemed to see straight through him. "The truth." "Whose truth?" "Everyone's." Charlie felt that familiar chill, the one he'd felt as a kid when Eddie decided to clean house. His brother's version of justice was thorough and merciless and usually left everyone hurt. "Eddie," Charlie said carefully, "whatever you're thinking of doing, maybe we should talk about it first." Eddie smiled, and it was the saddest thing Charlie had ever seen. "I'm done talking, Charlie. I've been talking for 22 years. He walked out of the kitchen, leaving Charlie alone with the clean dishes and the growing certainty that this weekend was going to end badly for everyone involved. Saturday morning, 2 days before the wedding. Dr. Felix Moran had been dreading this meeting for 3 weeks, ever since Margaret Halloran called with that tone in her voice. The tone that meant she was about to ask him to do something that would test the limits of his medical ethics and their 40-year friendship. They met at the Harbor Cafe, neutral ground where the morning crowd of fishermen and tourists would provide cover for whatever Margaret needed to discuss. She was already there when he arrived, nursing a cup of coffee and staring out at the water like she could see the future in the Whitecaps. "You look tired, Felix." He sat down across from her, noting how she'd aged in the past year. Margaret Halloran had always been formidable, but now she looked brittle, like she might shatter if someone spoke too loudly. "I've been losing sleep," he admitted, "ever since your call." She smiled without humor. "You always were too honest for your own good." The waitress brought Felix coffee and left them alone. He waited for Margaret to speak first. She'd called this meeting. She could explain what she needed. "Sarah's pregnant," Margaret said finally. "Congratulations. I'm sure you're thrilled to be a great-grandmother. The timing is interesting, don't you think?" Felix's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. "Margaret, what exactly are you asking me?" "I'm not asking anything. I'm telling you that Sarah's pregnancy is 6 weeks along, according to her doctor in Boston, which means conception occurred in late April." Felix set down his cup. And Owen Fletcher was in California for 3 weeks in April. Business trip. "I have the hotel receipts." The implication hit Felix like a physical blow. "Margaret, you can't possibly be suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm simply sharing information with an old friend." Felix looked around the cafe, making sure no one was listening. "Even if what you're implying were true, which I'm not saying it is, what would you expect me to do about it?" Margaret's smile was arctic. "Nothing. I would expect you to do absolutely nothing. Just like you did nothing when that nurse accused you of inappropriate conduct 5 years ago. Just like you did nothing when I made sure the medical board never saw her complaint." Felix felt the familiar sick twist in his stomach that came with remembering his worst mistake. That was different. I never touched her inappropriately. She was a troubled young woman who made accusations that could have destroyed your career and your marriage, and I made sure those accusations disappeared. "Margaret, please." "I'm not threatening you, Felix. I'm reminding you that friendship sometimes requires discretion. Sarah is happy. Owen is happy. The family is happy. Why would we want to disturb that happiness with unnecessary questions about timing and paternity?" Felix stared at his coffee, watching the cream swirl like storm clouds. "What if Eddie asks questions?" "Eddie won't ask questions if there's nothing to question. Sarah's doctor confirmed a healthy pregnancy at 6 weeks. That's all anyone needs to know. And if he comes to me directly? Margaret's eyes were steel. Then you'll remember that patient confidentiality is sacred, and Sarah's medical information is private. You'll remember that you're a doctor, not a detective. She stood up, leaving money on the table for both their coffees. I'll see you at the wedding, Felix. It's going to be beautiful. Felix watched her walk away, her spine straight and her step confident. Margaret Halloran had just threatened him with surgical precision, and he couldn't even be angry about it because he'd given her the knife years ago when he'd let her save his career. He finished his coffee and tried not to think about the Hippocratic Oath and how many small compromises it took to completely lose your way. Saturday afternoon. Paulina Voss had been waiting 20 years for this phone call, and when it finally came, she was disappointed by how ordinary Eddie Halloran sounded. She'd expected more drama from the man who was about to help her destroy Helena Halloran's life. Do you have what I asked for? Eddie's voice was calm, professional. Paulina looked at the files spread across her desk, bank records, emails, photographs. 20 years of careful documentation of Helena's business practices, waiting for the right moment to be used against her. I have everything, she said. The Patterson development kickbacks, the zoning board bribes, the tax evasion scheme. Your wife has been very busy. How much? For the complete file? 50,000? Eddie was quiet for so long, Paulina thought the connection had dropped. That's a lot of money, he finally said. It's a lot of information. Helena's been playing dirty for years, but she's been careful. This level of evidence doesn't come cheap. I'll need time to get the money together. Paulina smiled. She'd been expecting this. Actually, I have a better idea. I don't need your money, Eddie. I need your cooperation. Cooperation? I want to destroy Helena professionally and personally. Money is just money. Revenge is priceless. She could hear Eddie breathing on the other end of the line. What kind of cooperation? He asked. Access. I need someone on the inside. Someone who can provide real-time information about Helena's movements, her meetings, her plans. I need someone who can help me time the release of this information for maximum impact. You want me to spy on my own wife? I want you to help me give Helena Halloran exactly what she deserves. Paulina had been Helena's business rival for 2 decades, ever since they'd both applied for the same development project fresh out of college. Helena had gotten the project, and Paulina had gotten a valuable lesson about how the world really worked. Pretty girls with the right connections didn't have to play by the same rules as everyone else. But rules had a way of catching up with people eventually. Why now? Eddie asked. Because Helena is vulnerable. Her daughter's getting married, she's distracted, she's making mistakes. And because you called me, which means she's vulnerable at home too. Eddie was quiet again. I'll send you a sample, Paulina continued. Bank records from the Patterson deal. Review them, confirm what you probably already suspect, and then call me back. And if I don't call back, Paulina's smile was sharp as a blade, then I release everything anyway, but you won't have any control over the timing. It might come out during Sarah's wedding reception, or during Helena's next business presentation, or while she's having lunch with her lover. The sharp intake of breath told Paulina she'd hit the target. You know about Owen, Eddie said. I know about everything, Eddie. The question is, do you want to control how this information comes to light, or do you want to be just another victim of Helena's choices? Paulina hung up and leaned back in her chair. She'd spent 20 years building her own business, playing by rules that Helena had never had to follow. Now it was time to level the playing field. Her phone buzzed 30 minutes later, a text from Eddie. Send me everything. Saturday evening. Bridge found Sarah crying in the beach house bathroom, mascara streaming down her cheeks like black rain. Sarah, what's wrong? Sarah looked up from where she sat on the edge of the bathtub, pregnancy test in one hand, cell phone in the other. I tried to call Owen to tell him about the doctor's appointment today. He didn't answer. So I called his hotel in Boston. Bridge's stomach dropped, and he's not there. He checked out yesterday morning. The desk clerk said he left with a woman. Bridge sat down on the bathroom floor, trying to look surprised. Maybe it was just business. It was my stepmother, Bridge. The desk clerk described her perfectly. Red hair, expensive clothes, talks like she went to Harvard. Sarah's voice was hollow, like she was talking from the bottom of a well. Owen is sleeping with Helena. Bridge wanted to comfort her friend, but part of her, The part that had always been jealous of Sarah's perfect life felt a sick satisfaction. Finally, something in Sarah's world was falling apart. "Are you sure?" Bridge asked. Sarah held up her phone. "I hired a private investigator 3 hours ago. Owen and Helena have been meeting at the Harbor Inn every Friday for 2 months. They think they're being discreet, but the desk clerk recognizes them." "Oh, Sarah." "The baby," Sarah whispered. "What if the baby isn't Owen's?" Bridge did the math in her head. Sarah was 6 weeks pregnant. If Helena and Owen had been meeting for 2 months, when did you and Owen last? Bridge trailed off. "We haven't been together much lately. He's been so busy with work, and I've been stressed about the wedding. We made love maybe 3 times in the past 2 months. Sarah started crying again, harder this time. Bridge put her arms around her friend and held her while she sobbed, and tried not to think about Eddie's email and Paulina Voss and the investigation that was already underway. "What are you going to do?" Bridge asked. Sarah pulled away, wiping her eyes with toilet paper. "I don't know, the wedding is in 2 days. Everyone's coming. The deposits are all paid." "Sarah, if Owen is cheating, I can't prove it's his baby or not without a paternity test, and I can't get that until after the baby's born. And what if it is his baby? What if I'm wrong about everything?" Sarah stood up and looked at herself in the mirror, trying to repair her makeup. "Maybe I should just pretend I don't know. Maybe I should go through with the wedding and figure it out later." Bridge stared at her friend. "You can't marry someone who's sleeping with your stepmother." "Why not? My dad married someone who sleeps with other people. Maybe that's just how marriage works in my family." "Sarah, you deserve better than that." Sarah laughed, but it sounded like breaking glass. "Do I? My whole life I've gotten everything I wanted just by smiling and being nice. Maybe this is what I actually deserve." She turned away from the mirror. "Don't tell anyone about this, Bridge. Please. I need time to think." Bridge nodded, but as she watched Sarah walk out of the bathroom, she was already planning her next move. Because Sarah might be willing to pretend she didn't know the truth, but Bridge wasn't. Sarah Halloran had finally gotten something she didn't deserve, and Bridge was going to make sure she kept it. Some friends were worth protecting. Others were worth watching burn. Sunday morning, one day before the wedding. Eddie stood in his brother Charlie's studio apartment looking at 20 years of failure condensed into 400 square feet. Empty beer bottles, unpaid bills, and the smell of desperation that clung to everything like smoke. "You look like crap," Charlie said, opening another beer even though it wasn't even noon. "Thanks. You look exactly like I expected." Charlie laughed. "Still the charming older brother. What brings you to my palace?" Eddie sat down on the only chair that wasn't covered in laundry. "I need your help." "With what?" "Helena's been embezzling money from her business." "I have proof." Charlie's beer can stopped halfway to his mouth. "Holy crap, Eddie. Are you serious?" Eddie pulled out a folder and spread photographs across Charlie's coffee table. Bank statements, canceled checks, email printouts. $200,000 over 3 years. She's been skimming from client escrow accounts and covering it up with fake invoices. Charlie studied the papers. "Where did you get this?" "Does it matter?" "It matters because you're talking about destroying your wife's life, and I want to know why." Eddie was quiet for a long moment. "She's having an affair with Owen." "Owen? As in Sarah's Owen?" "As in Sarah's Owen, who she's marrying tomorrow." Charlie set down his beer and really looked at his brother for the first time since Eddie had arrived. "Jesus, Eddie. How long have you known?" "I suspected for weeks. I confirmed it yesterday." "And you want to what exactly? Ruin Helena's business and expose the affair?" Eddie's smile was cold as January. "I want to give everyone what they deserve." Charlie stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the harbor where their father had taught them to fish before everything went wrong. "This isn't justice, Eddie. This is revenge." "What's the difference?" "Justice is about making things right. Revenge is about making people pay." Eddie gathered up the photographs. "Same outcome." "No, it's not. Justice would be divorcing Helena and letting Sarah know about Owen. Revenge is burning down everyone's life because yours got burned first." Eddie stood up. "I didn't come here for therapy, Charlie. I came here because I need someone to help me leak this information to the right people at the right time." "Why me?" "Because you're broke. You're desperate, and you have nothing left to lose." Charlie felt the words hit like a physical blow. Forget you, Eddie. I'm not wrong, am I? You lost your job last week. You're 3 months behind on rent. You're drinking yourself to death because you can't stand the sight of your own life. Charlie wanted to argue, but the empty beer bottles were evidence for Eddie's case. What do you want me to do? Charlie asked. Eddie pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. There's $5,000 in here. I want you to take these documents to the Harbor Gazette tomorrow morning. Tell them you're a whistleblower, someone who worked with Helena and discovered the embezzlement. Give them just enough information to start asking questions. Charlie looked at the envelope like it might explode. Why not do it yourself? Because I need to be surprised when it comes out. I need to look like a victim, not a perpetrator. And what happens to Helena? Helena loses her business, her reputation, and probably her freedom. Financial crimes aren't taken lightly around here. What about Sarah? This comes out tomorrow. Her wedding day is ruined. Eddie's expression didn't change. Sarah deserves to know who she's marrying. Charlie picked up the envelope, feeling the weight of the cash inside. $5,000 would solve his immediate problems. It would buy him time to figure out his life. This is wrong, Eddie. Maybe, but it's also necessary. Charlie looked at his older brother, remembering the boy who'd taught him to tie his shoes and helped him with homework and protected him from bullies. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who'd learned that the world was cruel and decided to be crueler. Okay, Charlie said. I'll do it. Eddie nodded and headed for the door. Timing is everything, Charlie. The story needs to break exactly at noon tomorrow. Not before, not after. Why noon? Eddie's smile was sharp as broken glass. Because that's when Helena will be giving her mother of the bride speech at Sarah's wedding lunch. He left Charlie alone with the money and the photographs, and the growing certainty that his family was about to implode in spectacular fashion. Charlie opened another beer and tried not to think about what $5,000 was really buying. Sunday afternoon. Margaret Halloran stood in her kitchen staring at the wedding cake she'd spent 3 days decorating. 3 tiers of vanilla sponge with raspberry filling, covered in fondant roses that had taken her 8 hours to make by hand. It was beautiful and perfect, and completely wasted on a marriage that wouldn't last 6 months. The phone rang. Doctor. Moran's name appeared on the caller ID. Felix? Margaret, we need to talk. Eddie came to see me this morning. Margaret's hands went cold. What did he want? He asked about Sarah's pregnancy. Specifically, he wanted to know about paternity testing and whether I could run tests without the patient's knowledge. What did you tell him? I told him that would be unethical and illegal. But Margaret, he knows something. He asked very specific questions about conception dates and prenatal care. Margaret sat down heavily in her kitchen chair. How much does he know? I don't know, but he's suspicious. And if he's suspicious, he's going to keep digging until he finds what he's looking for. Margaret looked at the wedding cake and felt 40 years of careful family management crumbling around her. What do you think he'll do? I think Eddie Halloran is a man who's been pushed too far, and men like that are capable of anything. Margaret hung up and walked to her bedroom, where she kept her important papers in a fireproof safe. Birth certificates, insurance policies, and at the very back, a manila envelope she'd hoped never to open again. Inside the envelope were documents that could destroy her family or save it, depending on how she used them. Evidence of financial irregularities from Eddie's business, collected years ago when she'd suspected he was skimming money to pay for Helena's expensive tastes. She'd kept the documents as insurance, never imagining she'd need to use them against her own son. Margaret picked up her phone and dialed Eddie's number. Mother? Eddie, dear, I was wondering if you could come over for tea this afternoon. There's something we need to discuss. I'm busy today, Mother. Wedding preparations. It's about Helena's business troubles. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. What business troubles? Eddie asked finally. The kind that could land someone in prison if the wrong people found out about them. The kind that could destroy a family's reputation. I'll be there in an hour. Margaret hung up and put the kettle on. She'd spent her whole life protecting this family, and she wasn't going to stop now, even if it meant protecting them from each other. Sunday evening, the final confrontation. Eddie arrived at his mother's house carrying flowers and wearing the expression of a man who'd already made peace with terrible decisions. Margaret let him in and served tea in her best china, the same pattern she'd used for every family crisis for 40 years. You look tired, dear. Eddie sat across from her at the dining room table, noting how she'd positioned his chair so he couldn't see the papers spread on the kitchen counter. I wonder why. I imagine planning Sarah's wedding has been stressful. Such a big event. So many details to coordinate. Is that why you called me here, Mother? To discuss wedding planning? Margaret sipped her tea and studied her son's face. Eddie had always been the hardest of her children to read, even as a boy. He felt everything deeply but showed nothing on the surface. I called you here because I know what you're planning to do. Eddie's expression didn't change. What am I planning to do? You're planning to destroy Helena's business and expose her affair with Owen. You're planning to ruin Sarah's wedding day and humiliate your family in front of the entire town. Eddie set down his teacup. You know about the affair? I've known for 2 months. I also know about Helena's financial problems and your arrangement with Paulina Voss. Eddie's mask finally slipped, showing a flash of surprise. How? Because I've been protecting this family longer than you've been alive, and I don't intend to stop now. Margaret stood up and retrieved the manila envelope from the kitchen counter. She set it in front of Eddie and watched his face as he recognized his own handwriting on the bank statements inside. What is this? Evidence of your embezzlement from the family construction business. $250,000 over 5 years, skimmed from project budgets and hidden in offshore accounts. Eddie opened the envelope and spread the documents across the table. His own financial crimes documented with the same precision he'd used to build the case against Helena. Where did you get these? I've had them for 3 years. I hired an investigator when I suspected you were stealing money to pay for Helena's lifestyle. I kept quiet because I understood why you did it. Helena is expensive, and your pride wouldn't let you admit you couldn't afford her. Eddie stared at the papers, seeing his own signature on dozens of fraudulent invoices. Why are you showing me this now? Because if you destroy Helena, I'll destroy you. If Helena goes to prison for embezzlement, you'll go to prison too. If Sarah's wedding is ruined by scandal, it will be your scandal as well as Helena's. Margaret sat back down and refilled her teacup. Mutually assured destruction, dear. It's how families really work. Eddie looked at his mother with something approaching admiration. You've been planning this conversation for years. I've been planning for every possible scenario. That's what mothers do. And what if I call your bluff? What if I go ahead with my plan anyway? Margaret's smile was arctic. Then tomorrow morning, Charlie will receive an anonymous package containing evidence of your financial crimes. By noon, when Helena's story breaks, yours will be breaking too. By evening, both of you will be arrested. Sarah will lose both parents on her wedding day. Eddie gathered up the documents and put them back in the envelope. You're protecting Helena. I'm protecting the family. Helena made mistakes, but destroying her won't fix your marriage. It will just create more wreckage for the rest of us to clean up. She's sleeping with our daughter's fiancé. And you've been stealing money for years. Neither of you is innocent. Eddie stood up, envelope in hand. So what do you propose? Helena ends the affair. Owen marries Sarah as planned. You get counseling for your marriage. Everyone keeps their secrets and their freedom. And if Helena won't agree to those terms? Margaret's expression was stone. Then I'll make the same offer to her that I'm making to you. Cooperate or face the consequences. Eddie walked to the door, then turned back. What about Sarah? She deserves to know the truth about Owen. Sarah deserves a chance at happiness. The truth is a luxury she can't afford right now. Eddie studied his mother's face, seeing 40 years of compromise and calculation in the lines around her eyes. You really believe that? I believe that sometimes the best thing you can do for people you love is protect them from their own choices. Eddie nodded and left without another word. Margaret watched him drive away, then called Helena. We need to talk, she said when Helena answered. Tomorrow morning, before the wedding. There's something you need to understand about family loyalty. Margaret hung up and looked at the wedding cake sitting on her counter. Tomorrow would be the most important performance of her life, and she intended to give a flawless show. Monday morning, wedding day. Helena Halloran stood in her walk-in closet at 6 a.m., surrounded by 3 decades of expensive clothes, and feeling like she had nothing appropriate to wear to her stepdaughter's wedding. Everything felt like a costume for a play she no longer wanted to perform in. Her phone buzzed. Text from Owen. We need to talk before the ceremony. Helena deleted the message without responding. She'd made her decision during the sleepless night, staring at the ceiling while Eddie pretended to sleep beside her. The affair was over. It had to be. Another text. Helena, please, this is important. She blocked his number. Eddie emerged from the bathroom, already dressed in his wedding tuxedo. He looked handsome and tired and completely unreachable. You're up early, he said. Couldn't sleep. He nodded like this was perfectly normal, like they hadn't been living as strangers in the same house for months. Big day. Yes, big day. They moved around each other with practiced efficiency. Two people who'd learned to share space without touching. Helena wondered when they'd stopped seeing each other as lovers and started seeing each other as obstacles. Her phone rang. Margaret's name on the caller ID. Good morning, Margaret. Helena, dear. I was wondering if you could stop by before you head to the church. I have something for Sarah, a family heirloom for her to wear. Helena looked at Eddie, who was pretending not to listen while he adjusted his cufflinks. Of course. I'll be there in 30 minutes. She hung up and reached for a navy blue dress she'd worn to dozens of society functions. Safe, appropriate, forgettable. Tell Sarah I'll see her at the church, Eddie said without looking at her. Helena nodded and left him standing in their bedroom, probably already planning how to spend his day without her. Margaret's house smelled like coffee and roses. Helena found her in the kitchen, wearing a pale pink dress that made her look fragile and dangerous at the same time. You look lovely, dear. Thank you. You said you had something for Sarah? Margaret smiled and gestured to a chair. Sit down first. Coffee? Helena sat, sensing a trap but unable to see its shape. Just a small cup. Margaret poured coffee into delicate china cups and sat across from Helena. I know about Owen. The words hit Helena like cold water. She set down her cup carefully, buying time while her mind raced. I don't know what you mean. Of course you do. You've been meeting him at the Harbor Inn every Friday for 2 months. You've been having an affair with your stepdaughter's fiancé. Helena's hands trembled slightly. Margaret, I think there's been a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding. I have photographs. Margaret pulled out a manila folder and spread pictures across the kitchen table. Helena and Owen entering the hotel together, sitting close in a restaurant booth, kissing in Owen's car. Where did you get these? I hired an investigator when I suspected something was wrong. Sarah has been so nervous about the wedding, and Owen seemed distracted. I wanted to make sure everything was as it should be. Helena stared at the photographs, seeing her own betrayal documented in black and white. What do you want? I want you to end it. Today. Permanently. It's already over, Margaret raised an eyebrow. Is it? Because Owen has been calling and texting you all morning? Helena's phone was face down on the table, but she could see the screen lighting up with new messages. I'm not responding to him. Good, but ending the affair isn't enough. You need to make sure Owen goes through with the wedding. I can't control what Owen does. Margaret's smile was sharp. You got him into this situation. You can get him out of it. Sarah is pregnant, Helena. That baby needs a father, and Owen needs to be that father. Helena felt sick. Sarah's pregnant? 6 weeks along. Which means the baby was conceived while you were sleeping with Owen. The timeline hit Helena like a physical blow. If Sarah was 6 weeks pregnant and she'd been with Owen for 2 months, then the baby could be anyone's. Does Eddie know? Eddie knows about the affair. He doesn't know about the pregnancy timing. Helena closed her eyes. What happens if I refuse to cooperate? Margaret leaned forward. Then Eddie destroys your business, Owen abandons Sarah, and you lose everything you've spent 20 years building. Your reputation, your career, your marriage, your stepdaughter. And if I cooperate? Then Owen marries Sarah as planned. You rebuild your marriage with Eddie. Everyone keeps their secrets. Helena opened her eyes and looked at Margaret. You're blackmailing me. I'm saving your family. Helena gathered up the photographs and put them back in the folder. What do you need me to do? Convince Owen that marrying Sarah is his only option. Make him understand that running away will destroy both of your lives. And after that? After that, you become the stepmother Sarah deserves and the wife Eddie married. You put this mistake behind you and move forward. Helena stood up, feeling like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. I'll talk to Owen. Good. And Helena? If you ever betray this family again, I won't be nearly so generous. Helena nodded and left without another word, driving toward the church where she would either save her family or watch it burn. Monday late morning. Bridge Collins sat in the Harbor Gazette office, watching Charlie Halloran pace back and forth in front of the editor's desk like a caged animal. She'd arrived 15 minutes early for her appointment, hoping to catch the story before it broke. "You're sure about this information?" the editor asked Charlie. Charlie nodded, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "I worked with Helena Halloran for 6 months. I saw the fake invoices, the double billing, the missing escrow funds. She's been stealing from clients for years. And you're coming forward now because I can't live with being part of it anymore. I quit her company last week when I realized how deep the fraud went." Bridge watched Charlie lie with impressive conviction. She'd done her own research after finding Eddie's email, and she knew Charlie had never worked for Helena's business. But the documents he'd brought looked real enough, and the editor was taking notes. "We'll need to verify this information before we can publish," the editor said. "Of course. But you should know that there are other people involved. Helena's been bribing city officials to get her development projects approved." Bridge felt a sick thrill as she watched the story grow. Charlie was improvising now, adding details that made Helena look even worse. "Can you provide names?" Charlie hesitated. "I'd rather not say until you've verified the financial information, but if you dig into the Patterson development deal, you'll find what you're looking for." The editor made more notes. "When can we reach you for follow-up questions? I'm leaving town after this meeting, family emergency, but you have my contact information." Bridge waited until Charlie left before approaching the editor's desk. "Excuse me?" "I couldn't help overhearing. Are you really going to publish a story about Helena Halloran?" The editor looked up. "Who's asking?" "I'm a friend of the family. Sarah Halloran is getting married today. If you publish this story now, you'll ruin her wedding day. That's unfortunate timing, but news doesn't wait for convenient moments." Bridge took a deep breath. "What if I told you there was more to the story? What if I told you Helena Halloran has been having an affair with her stepdaughter's fiancé?" The editor's pen stopped moving. "Do you have proof?" Bridge pulled out her phone and showed him the photographs she'd taken yesterday outside the Harbor Inn. She'd followed Helena after their conversation, hoping to catch her meeting Owen. Instead, she'd caught Helena breaking up with him. "These were taken yesterday. Helena Halloran and Owen Fletcher. He's supposed to marry Sarah in 4 hours." The editor studied the photos. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because Sarah Halloran deserves to know who she's marrying. And because Helena Halloran deserves to face consequences for her choices." Bridge felt a moment of guilt thinking about Sarah crying in the bathroom, but she pushed it aside. Sarah would thank her eventually. Everyone would be better off knowing the truth. "What's your relationship to the family?" the editor asked. "I'm Sarah's maid of honor. I've been watching this family lie to each other for years." "Today it stops." The editor looked at the photographs again, then at his notes from Charlie's interview. "This is quite a story. It's the biggest story this town has seen in decades." Bridge left the newspaper office feeling lighter than she had in months. For once in her life, she wasn't just watching from the sidelines. She was making things happen. Monday noon. The wedding. Sarah Halloran stood in the church vestibule, wearing her grandmother's wedding dress and trying not to throw up. The morning sickness was bad enough, but the knowledge that Owen might be cheating made everything worse. Bridge appeared beside her, looking guilty and excited at the same time. "How are you feeling?" Bridge asked. "Like I'm about to make the biggest mistake of my life." Bridge took her hands. "Sarah, there's something you need to know." "Bridge, whatever it is, can it wait? I'm getting married in 10 minutes. "No, it can't wait. Owen has been having an affair." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What?" "With Helena. I have proof. Photographs, hotel records, everything." Bridge pulled out her phone and showed Sarah the pictures she'd taken the day before. Owen and Helena together, obviously intimate, obviously lying to everyone. Sarah stared at the screen, feeling her perfect world crumble around her. "When were these taken?" "Yesterday. I followed them after I saw them together at the Harbor Inn." "You knew yesterday, and you didn't tell me?" Bridge looked uncomfortable. "I thought you should decide what to do with the information." Sarah's hands shook as she scrolled through the photographs. "How long has this been going on?" "At least 2 months, maybe longer." Sarah looked at herself in the vestibule mirror, seeing a stranger in white lace. The baby. What if the baby isn't Owen's? I don't know, Sarah, but you can't marry him now. Not knowing this, Sarah closed her eyes and tried to think. 200 guests were waiting in the church. The reception was paid for. Her whole family was here. Sarah? Bridget's voice seemed to come from far away. What are you going to do? Sarah opened her eyes and looked at her reflection again. The stranger in the mirror looked back at her with clear, cold eyes. I'm going to get married. Sarah, you can't. Yes, I can. Owen made his choice, and I'm making mine. I'm not going to humiliate myself and my family because my fiancé is a cheater and my stepmother is a liar. Sarah turned away from the mirror and faced Bridge. This conversation never happened. You never showed me these pictures. You never followed them to the hotel. But Sarah, if you ever mention this to anyone, I'll make sure you never work in this town again. My family has connections, Bridge. Don't test them. Bridge stepped back, shocked by the ice in Sarah's voice. I was trying to help you. No, you were trying to destroy my family because you've always been jealous of what we have. Well, congratulations. You got what you wanted. The church doors opened and Margaret appeared, wearing pink silk and a smile that could cut glass. Sarah, dear, it's time. Sarah took her grandfather's arm and walked down the aisle toward Owen, who stood at the altar looking pale and nervous. She didn't look at Helena in the front row, didn't acknowledge Bridge standing with the other bridesmaids, didn't think about the baby growing inside her or who its father might be. She thought about power and choice and the difference between winning and surviving. When the minister asked if she took Owen to be her husband, she said yes with a voice that carried to the back of the church. When Owen said yes in return, she watched his face and memorized his lies. When they kissed to seal their marriage, she whispered in his ear, I know about Helena. Owen's face went white, but Sarah smiled at their guests like the happiest bride in the world. Monday afternoon, the reception. The Harbor Gazette hit the newsstands at 2 p.m., just as the wedding reception was reaching full swing. The headline read, Local developer accused of fraud and corruption, with Helena's business photo prominently displayed. Eddie saw the papers first, having positioned himself near the hotel entrance specifically to watch for them. He bought 3 copies and distributed them strategically around the reception hall, leaving them where guests would find them during cocktail hour. Helena was giving her mother of the bride speech when the whispers started. As I look at Sarah and Owen today, Helena said into the microphone, I see the promise of new beginnings and the strength that comes from family. Eddie watched faces in the crowd as guests discovered the newspapers. Shock, confusion, then the excited murmur of people witnessing a scandal unfold in real time. Margaret caught Eddie's eye from across the room and shook her head slightly. Too late for regrets now. And I know that Sarah will build a marriage based on trust, honesty, and the values that have always guided our family. Someone in the back of the room laughed, a sharp sound that cut through Helena's words. She paused, confused, then continued. So please, join me in raising a glass to the happy couple. To the happy couple? Charlie's voice was too loud, too sharp. He was already drunk, probably had been since morning. May their marriage last longer than Helena's business. The silence that followed was deafening. Helena's face went white as she realized something was terribly wrong. Eddie stood up. I think what my brother means is that we all hope Sarah and Owen have many happy years ahead of them. Do we? Charlie swayed slightly. Because according to the Harbor Gazette, happy families are hard to come by around here. He held up a copy of the newspaper. Local developer accused of fraud and corruption. Fancy that. Helena dropped the microphone. The feedback screech that followed seemed to wake everyone from their stunned silence. Guests pulled out their phones, some calling friends to share the gossip, others taking pictures of Helena's horrified face. Within minutes, the story would be all over social media. Sarah stood up from the head table, still wearing her wedding dress, still beautiful and composed. I think we should all remember that this is supposed to be a celebration. Her voice carried clearly through the room. Whatever business problems Helena might be facing, today is about Owen and me starting our life together. She turned to Owen, who looked like he wanted to disappear. Isn't that right, husband? Owen nodded mutely. Good. Then let's get back to celebrating. Sarah sat down and picked up her champagne glass. The gesture was so calm, so controlled, that it somehow made everything worse. Eddie felt a grudging respect for his daughter. Sarah had inherited Margaret's talent for performing under pressure. Helena stumbled away from the microphone and found Eddie at his table. "Did you do this?" she whispered. Eddie looked at his wife, noting how the color had drained from her face, how her hands shook as she clutched her purse. "Does it matter? Eddie, please. We can fix this. We can explain." "Explain what? The embezzlement? The bribes? The affair?" Helena's eyes went wide. I know about everything. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Helena looked around the reception hall, seeing their friends and neighbors whispering behind their hands, seeing the newspaper headlines, seeing 20 years of careful reputation management, crumbling in real time. "What do you want from me?" Eddie's smile was cold as winter. "I want you to face the consequences of your choices." He stood up and walked away, leaving Helena alone at the table while their marriage burned down around them. Monday evening. Bridge found Sarah in the hotel bathroom, sitting on the marble counter and staring at her wedding ring like it might explode. "Sarah?" Sarah looked up. Her makeup was still perfect, her hair still elegantly arranged, but something behind her eyes had gone dark. "Everyone's talking about the newspaper story," Bridge said carefully. "I imagine they are." "Helena left about an hour ago. Just walked out of her own stepdaughter's reception." Sarah nodded like this was perfectly normal. "She's probably meeting with lawyers." "Sarah, are you okay?" Sarah laughed, and the sound made Bridge's skin crawl. "Am I okay?" "My stepmother embezzled money from her clients, had an affair with my husband, and ruined my wedding reception. My father orchestrated the whole thing to get revenge. My new husband looks like he wants to run away to another country. And I'm pregnant with a baby that might belong to any of them." Sarah, "But you know what, Bridge? I'm actually fine. Better than fine. I'm free." "Free?" Sarah slid down from the counter and faced Bridge in the mirror. "I spent my whole life trying to be perfect for other people. Perfect daughter, perfect student, perfect fiancé. Always worried about what everyone thought, always trying to make everyone happy." She turned around. "But perfect is exhausting. And today I learned that no one in my family is perfect. We're all just people making terrible choices and hoping no one notices." "So what are you going to do?" Sarah's smile was sharp as broken glass. "I'm going to stop pretending. I'm going to keep the baby, divorce Owen as soon as legally possible, and build a life that makes me happy instead of making everyone else comfortable. And Helena? Helena will probably go to prison. Owen will probably run back to whatever life he had before he met me. My father will probably drink himself to death from guilt. And my family will probably never recover from tonight." Bridge stared at her friend, recognizing nothing familiar in Sarah's expression. "And you're okay with that?" "I'm okay with the truth." Finally, Sarah walked toward the bathroom door, then paused. "Oh, and Bridge, thank you." "For what?" "For showing me those photographs. You thought you were destroying my life, but you actually saved it." Sarah left Bridge alone in the bathroom, and for the first time since elementary school, Bridge felt genuinely afraid of Sarah Halloran. Monday night. Eddie sat in his car outside the Harbor Inn, watching Helena's BMW in the parking lot. She'd been inside for 2 hours, probably meeting with lawyers or private investigators or anyone else who might help her salvage what was left of her reputation. His phone buzzed. Text message from Margaret. "Come home, we need to talk." Eddie deleted the message and got out of his car. He walked into the hotel lobby and asked the desk clerk for Helena's room number. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't give out guest information." Eddie pulled out his wallet and showed the clerk his driver's license. "I'm her husband." The clerk hesitated, then handed him a key card. "Room 237. Eddie took the elevator to the second floor and knocked on Helena's door. "Go away, Owen," Helena's voice called from inside. "It's Eddie." The door opened. Helena stood there in her wedding reception dress, mascara streaked down her cheeks, looking like a beautiful disaster. "What do you want?" "To talk. We're past talking." Eddie pushed past her into the room. It was the same room where she'd been meeting Owen for 2 months, the same room where she'd destroyed their marriage. "Nice choice of venue," he said. Helena closed the door and leaned against it. "I suppose you think you've won." "Have I? You destroyed my business, exposed my affair, and humiliated me in front of the entire town. If that's not winning, I don't know what is." Eddie sat down in the room's single chair and looked at his wife. 22 years of marriage, and he felt like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. Why, Owen? He asked. Helena was quiet for a long moment. Because he paid attention to me. Because he made me feel like I was more than just your wife and Sarah's stepmother. Because he wanted me, not what I could do for him. I wanted you. No, Eddie, you wanted a wife. You wanted someone to manage your household and attend your business dinners and make you look successful. You never wanted me. Eddie considered this. Maybe you're right. Helena looked surprised. You're admitting it? I'm admitting that we've both been pretending to be people we're not for a very long time. Helena sat down on the bed, suddenly looking exhausted. So what happens now? Now you face the consequences of embezzling $200,000 from your clients. And you face the consequences of destroying your own family for revenge. Eddie nodded. Fair enough. They sat in silence for a while. Two people who'd shared a life, but never really known each other. I'm going to divorce you, Helena said finally. I know. I'm probably going to prison. Probably. Sarah will never forgive either of us. No, she won't. Helena started crying again, quietly this time. I'm sorry, Eddie. For all of it, Eddie looked at her and felt something that might have been love or might have been pity. So am I. He stood up and walked to the door. Eddie? He turned back. Was it worth it? Getting your revenge? Eddie thought about Sarah's cold smile at the wedding, about Charlie's drunken laughter, about Margaret's disappointed face. He thought about the family he'd spent his whole life trying to fix, and how he'd finally broken it beyond repair. Ask me in a year, he said, and left his wife crying in the room where she'd betrayed him. 1 month later. The courtroom was packed when Helena Halloran was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for embezzlement and fraud. Sarah sat in the front row, 5 months pregnant now, watching her stepmother accept her fate with dignity. Owen had left town the day after the wedding, sending divorce papers from California and a check for $10,000 with a note that said, "For the baby." Sarah had deposited the check and burned the note. Eddie sat 3 rows behind Sarah, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 5 weeks. The investigation into Helena's business had expanded to include Eddie's construction company, and while no charges had been filed yet, his reputation was destroyed. Margaret sat beside Eddie, spine straight, chin up, still playing the role of family matriarch, even though her family had ceased to exist in any meaningful way. Charlie wasn't there. He'd been found dead in his apartment a week after the wedding, victim of an apparent pills overdose. The note he'd left was 3 words long. I'm sorry, Eddie. Bridge sat in the back of the courtroom, watching the final act of the drama she'd helped create. She'd gotten a promotion at work after being recognized for her investigative instincts in uncovering the Helena Halloran scandal. She told herself it was justice, but it felt like Pyrrhic victory. When the judge finished reading Helena's sentence, Sarah stood up and walked out without looking back. Eddie followed her into the courthouse hallway. Sarah, wait. She turned around, and Eddie saw his own eyes staring back at him with perfect, terrible clarity. What, Dad? I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. Sarah nodded. Okay. Is there anything I can do? Anything you need? Sarah looked at him for a long moment, and Eddie saw the calculation behind her eyes. She'd learned from watching him destroy Helena, learned that knowledge was power and power was survival. Actually, yes. There's something you can do. Anything. Sarah's smile was sharp as a scalpel. You can stay away from me and my baby. Forever. She walked away, leaving Eddie alone in the courthouse hallway with the echoes of his own choices.